Um, Lost Highway, David Lynch. How do you fucking review a David Lynch movie anyways, man? He's one of the most weirdest, most surreal directors of all time. And yet, even if you hate any of his movies, you will remember them because they're so visually stimulating. Their stories don't make any sense, but if you think about it just enough, they do. The acting's always good, the setting's always good, the lighting is always good. Technicality-wise, his films are always amazing. But there's always something very off-kilter about it. There's always something in the narrative that doesn't really make any sense. There are certain visuals that are shoved into the storytelling or the scene, and you feel like it doesn't make any sense, and maybe it's just sudden and over the top. But the more you think about it, it makes sense as an overarching piece of work. His films are complete pieces of work. His movies never feel like just a collection of scenes. No, this is a project. And he's one of the very few filmmakers who seems to understand that it's a film. It's not scenes, it's a movie. And Lost Highway still kind of stands out because it's still a film of his that's strange, that doesn't really make any sense at times. But unlike most of his movies that are like that, this movie actually got mixed reviews, and it still gets mixed reactions from people. Most people say this is just a blueprint, a stylistic blueprint of what he was going to do with Mulholland Drive, which is admittedly a far superior movie. So let me get into this. This is the first time I'm watching this, so keep in mind, like most people, I did not make too much sense out of it. I'm gonna try and make as much sense out of it as I can. I don't think the technicalities really are important with this movie because it's a fucking David Lynch movie. It really isn't. Because it's always gonna be good. The acting's great. The makeup, the costumes, the fucking lighting is amazing. The way he uses sound, or better yet, the lack of sound and dark lighting and just the slow, very meditative pace. The way he uses all of these things to bring a genuine sense of tension and horror is beyond amazing. This is something that horror directors should watch, they should study, and they should really nail this down with anything they make. And I do like the fact that the film maneuvers various genres pretty well. It's obviously a mystery. It's very much so a psychological horror movie. There's some very subtle, off-kilter, dark comedy aspects to it all, because it has very ironic tones. There are romantic scenes, and when they are supposed to be romantic, they are very romantic. It's actually some of the most iconically romantic stuff I've ever seen. There's this scene where these two characters make love in the desert, and if you see it in the context of the film, it really is a off-kilter moment, but when you just capture that one scene and if you just watch that one scene, it's a very romantic scene. So he obviously knows how to juggle these genres and make them into a whole film. And here's the thing, even if you think the story doesn't make any sense, the way the film just changes up mood and atmosphere does not feel awkward. It does not feel like it's trying to be something else all of a sudden. No, it flows naturally, which is something really hard to do when it comes to being a dark comedy, a fucking romance, a psychological horror movie, and a mystery film all at the same time. So that's the technicalities of the film. Here's the thing with David Lynch movies, man. If you think too much about it, it doesn't make any sense. If you think too little about it, it doesn't make any sense. You really need to get into that middle ground, you know? You either see his films as pretentious, surrealist storytelling, or you see it as brilliant, surrealist storytelling. And I think this film is very much so an important film in his filmography because it really was a changing of his style. You know, you can see his style slowly changing in Blue Velvet. You know, he started with Eraserhead, obviously. So Eraserhead was like the big weird thing. But then he made Elephant Man, and he suddenly felt human. He suddenly felt like a very approachable director. But then he'll make Dune, which is just this overwrought of a Hollywood, you know, garbage piece of shit. But then he'll make Blue Velvet, which has undertones of what he's doing here with Mulholland Drive, but it's not really fully recognized. With Wild at Heart, there is some of the dark comedy and romantic tones that Lost Highway has, but it doesn't really have the dark, surrealist undertone that Lost Highway has. Lost Highway really is where his style kind of came into fruition, and he did this again with Mulholland Drive. He does this once again really drastically with Inland Empire, but with this film I feel like he was really trying to bring whatever he was trying to do with all of his other movies in the past, and he was trying to bring it to another level, just mixing it all up. And this is kind of his first attempt. Even Twin Peaks wasn't like this, so this was kind of his first attempt at being what we know now of the David Lynchian style. And here's the thing, I don't think it's supposed to make coherent sense. I think it's supposed to make a vague amount of sense. To explain this, I kind of need to give you the summary. So, in the beginning of the film, there's Fred, played by Bill Pullman, and there's Renee, played by Patricia Arquette. And they're a couple, there's some tension, but then they get these videotapes that's really weird. But then one night, he finally gets another videotape, and this time, the videotape shows him killing, Renee. But then, suddenly the shots change, and he's in a cell. Then, he turns into another guy named fucking Pete. He's younger, he's a kid, so he gets out, because, just because the guy killed another person doesn't mean we can jail another person who has another identity outside just because he changed into that guy. It doesn't really make any sense. So, Pete gets out. Now we have Alice, who looks exactly like Renee, probably because it's played by Patricia Arquette. And, okay, how do I explain this? So, we got the Fred segment, and we got the Pete segment. And as the film goes on, and around the end, Pete turns back into Fred. And Alice just disappears, and we have Renee. And in the end, it turns out that Renee was the only Renee Alice type of Patricia Arquette figure. Right away, here's something we should know. The transformation in itself should tell you that this film is not going to try to make any, authentic or realistic sense. It's gonna be a very abstract movie. There's also this mystery man who follows both of them around, and here's what I noticed. He's always there when it comes to things that are bad, when the actions go towards a very negative, deep end. So I feel like the Mystery Man represents evil in general. He looks the part, and quite frankly, I'm just saying he represents evil, or the devil, or Satan, or whatever, because I really can't find a fucking specific thing to attach him with. I feel like the Pete part is all just a huge fantasy, because he doesn't. There's this scene where Fred says, "I remember things my own way," and I feel like he killed Renee, because there are some subtle references of Renee, committing adultery against Fred. So Fred kills Renee. This does happen, but I feel like he fantasizes about the Pete part to think of him as a good person, because nobody wants to see himself as a serial killer, especially a wife killer. And so I feel like, in real-time sense, the first part happens, Renee and Fred, then he has the fantasy, and at the end of the film, he's running away from the cops in his own runaway car, and then, in the first part, he kills Renee, he fantasizes all about it, and then he goes to jail. It's just that the film represents the story as, in a different order. To me, it's first part of the film, fantasy, then the jail cell. The film presents you the first part, the jail cell, and the fantasy. So I feel like David Lynch just kind of switched the last two parts for each other. Now, if you really think more about it, it doesn't really make any sense, because you start to ask yourself, well, then how did Pete get into the jail cell, and how did Fred turn into Pete if Pete is a fantasy. Well, how did that happen, motherfucker? How? I'm just saying it's all a fantasy. That's my excuse. It's not real. The part where he turns into Pete, the fact that Pete has another story, the fact that Pete has a family and another girlfriend, and the fact that anything of the Pete part happened is all a fantasy. That's my excuse. And if you take that into the story, it kind of makes sense as much as I could. That's my personal theory. And even though I made some sense out of this, I still get why this is getting mixed reviews, because compared to Blue Velvet or Mulholland Drive, the film kind of leaves you cold. The romance isn't a passionate one. Everything feels very cold, very distant, very empty. It does feel like a technical bravado of an achievement instead of a human one. And Mulholland Drive has human elements. The Naomi Watts character kind of represents failure and dread and worries and, anxieties. Blue Velvet represents the fear in suburban neighborhoods, and the love story genuinely feels real between Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern. So with this film, there's nothing really going on. Bill Pullman and Patricia Arquette's romance really does not work, and I forget the guy who plays Pete, but the guy who plays Pete and Patricia Arquette's romance don't really work as well. So I just feel like the whole film does feel very humanless. That is a problem, and I feel like if it had that too, this film would have been on par with Mulholland Drive and whatnot. But for now, I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure if I want to rate this. It's a fucking Lynch movie. You make your own fucking opinions, man. It's fucking David Lynch. I don't know what to say. It's 12 minutes long. Nobody's watching this now. So, I don't give a fuck. David Lynch, Lost Highway. Who gives a fuck about the rating? Go watch it for your own mindfuckery. I don't know what I'm fucking doing, man. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. This is tea. Bye.